Hi, I'm Danielle and this is In Talks With, a series of bite-sized conversations about art, culture and design. This episode was recorded over the course of a day in September 2020 that I spent at Roche Court, the art gallery and sculpture park just outside Salisbury in England, a few miles south of Stonehenge. Originally built for Lord Nelson in 1804, the year before Trafalgar, Roche is a stately home which sits in acres of undulating parkland. In 1994, it was modernised and made into a sculpture park and exhibition space open to the public, called the New Art Centre by the gallerist Madeleine Bessborough, and it's now home to permanent pieces from some of the most important sculptors of the past 40 years. The New Art Centre also manages the Barbara Hepworth estate and exhibits contemporary artists, two of whom, Edmund de Waal and Jacqui Poncelet, I get to speak to here. At the end of the episode, I speak to Madeleine Bessborough herself, a woman who has been at the forefront of the art world since she first opened the original New Art Centre in 1958 on Sloane Street in London, and who has always worked to the belief that art can be incorporated into everyday living and can be for the benefit of all, not just an elite few. First up, here's my conversation with Edmund de Waal, artist and author of the compelling memoir The Hair with the Amber Eyes, and creator of the Library in Exile piece, which was shown at the Venice Biennale in 2019 and is also currently on view at the British Museum in London. He was awarded an OBE for his services to art in 2011. Over tea in Madeleine's living room, he told me about the new pieces he is showing at Roche Court and about the book he wrote over the summer. Edmund de Waal. Hello.
Hi. Hello, hi.
How are you?
I'm incredibly cheerful, actually. The sun's shining. I've got a new exhibition. It's rather a nice day, actually.
We are at Roche Court in Salisbury, the New Art Centre.
We are. It's a very beautiful house in 60 acres of sort of Elysian English countryside, rolling hills and trees and amazing sculpture and beautiful contemporary buildings as well. And it's a pretty good place to be.
You have a new exhibition here, which I have yet to see. I'm looking forward to having a look at it in a bit. I feel at an advantage that I haven't seen it because I'm looking forward to hearing your description before I see it. So maybe you could, for the benefit of the listeners, explain a bit about it.
So it's work I've made over the last 6 months, and the whole exhibition is actually called Tacit, which is a beautiful, beautiful Latin name for silence or pause, which is obviously what we've been going through in different ways. And what I've done is to use the materials I had to hand in the studio. I've used porcelain, of course, because I'm a potter. That's the stuff I have in the heart of my life, the heart of my practice. But I've also used two other kinds of stone, English stone, that I had in the studio. One is a very beautiful Nottingham alabaster, translucent, extraordinary. It's a bit like boiled sweets. It's extraordinarily beautiful, translucent alabaster. And the other material, which is the first time I've ever used it, is a golden sort of honey-coloured stone, Hornton stone from Northamptonshire. And I've been working with a stonemason to make benches, to make huge, heavy benches which have these smoothed tops where you want to sit, polished away, so it feels like they've been out in the landscape for decades, hundreds of years. And in all this work, all the work that I've made for this place, it's all about pausing. It's also all about touch. It's all about being invited to touch stuff. I mean, the last months, as you know, we've been told, don't touch each other, don't touch objects, don't touch anything. And, you know, I'm waving my arms around at you, hands around at you. Of course, for me, it's all about touch. It's all about connection through touch. So this is an exhibition about touch.
So people can sit on these benches?
I bloody hope so. They are absolutely invited to sit on these benches. They are places that you might want to sit by yourself or sit with someone else. And when you sit on them, I hope they slow you down. You find there are sort of different gradations of polish. There are different sort of places of where the stone has been worn away, and they are sculptures to sit on and touch.
Have you observed anybody interacting with them yet? I mean, it must be interesting as the creator of them to see how people behave when they come near them.
I'm terribly pleased, because just outside the rather beautiful drawing room window we're sitting in now, I put a pair of these the smaller benches near each other, and there was a couple yesterday sitting on them, sort of king and queen like a Henry Moore sculpture, and they look it's perfect, because they look very happy, actually. And they look quite regal. But they sort of taken the invitation just to pause, and that was great. They work.
Does it feels quite a modern idea, this idea of interact. Is interactive a word you'd use for this, or does that feel a bit removed from what you do?
I'll take interactive. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to say all my life I've made pots, and all that a pot is something that you have made and held and then passed on to someone else. So that transition of an object, that wonderful, vigorous movement of an object from one person to another is absolutely the heart of what I do. Why not do it with stone? Yeah,
that's the heart of the book you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, that book about... That book.
That book.
That book.
2010, was it?
Yes, 10 years ago. Yes, the Heavy Amber Eyes. That was all about passing things. Yeah. It was all about passing things on. So
sort of memory and this idea of objects, I don't know if they're imbued with memory as they get passed along, or this idea that things that can be rediscovered and the stories that are uncovered.
Well, I genuinely believe that objects hold memory and hold sort of not only the pulse of their making, the sort of pulse of the people long gone who've made them, but they do carry often very complicated. I mean, not everything's easy in objects, often quite complicated stories. But all you have to, the thing to do is just to slow down and spend time with them, as a first thing, and then you begin to discover more and more about them, and they reconnect you to other people's lives. I mean, that's such a simple, beautiful truth.
Yeah, and just going back to this idea of the bench, I suppose, is also, you just saying slowing down. It feels like a particularly poignant thing at the moment to sit down, slow down, reflect, because we have the time to do it. So I've just sort of realised that must be what you're thinking about as well.
That's absolutely yes.
And you just had an exhibition that closed at finished at the British Museum.
No. It's
still open?
No. It opened for 3 days, then closed for 6 months, and it's now open until the middle of January.
So it's called the Library of Exile.
Yeah.
At the British Museum, and originally it was shown at the Venice Biennale.
Yes.
I think 2019.
That's right.
Is there a connection between that? Maybe you'd like to talk a bit about that, since people can still visit it.
Absolutely. So it came out of not only my own family story. We're a family of Jewish refugees and all that sort of stuff, but at the fact that when I looked at my bookshelves, I was just conscious that almost 2/3 of the books that I was living with were written by people who'd migrated, who'd come from one country to another. And so I shaped this library, 2,000 books, 100 countries, in a beautiful pavilion, a temporary pavilion I'd made at the Venice Biennale, and the walls of the pavilion were covered in porcelain slip, liquid porcelain, to which I wrote a history of all the lost and destroyed libraries of the world. And then you come in this marvellous richness of books that you sit down and read and write your name in them. And then it moved on to Dresden, briefly, and now the British Museum. And it's just as it's moved, it's a bit like these objects we're talking about. It's got more and more and more special. It's been handled. The books have sometimes hundreds of people's names have written in the books. And what's so special about this, is that at the end of this exhibition in January, the whole library is. I'm giving it to Mosul in Iraq, where there was a great library that was destroyed by ISIS. So the whole library's final destination is in Iraq. So the library is a mobile library, travelling library.
Yeah. It's wonderful. It's such a wonderful idea. And I suppose also it's just feeding into this idea again of sculpture and stories, and objects and stories, which is so interesting. Before we finish, what are you thinking about? Are you someone who kind of moves on very quickly to the next project, and are you already thinking about that, or are you?
So yes, I mean one of the strangest things about lockdown is I unexpectedly wrote a book. So
as you do.
But honestly, if I'm really frank, that silence was so profound that I found that I was picking up things that I needed to do, stories, and I just started writing a book, which is going to come out next Easter, here and actually lots of different countries.
Is it a fiction or another memoir? Or?
It's a sort of memoir. It's letters. I wrote letters to this Parisian cousin, art collector, Jewish, who died in 1935. Wonderful person, had great collection. And I just started writing him letters. And it's turned into a book of letters about memory and memorial and loss and art. So wow. That's the next thing.
You must write quite fast.
Well, I don't, but if you're entirely by yourself and you're not travelling and you're not giving lectures and you're not doing press and you're not doing anything but sitting with yourself, then I think suddenly things happen. Things happen, all right. Well, Edmund de Waal, thank you so much for joining me on. I've loved it. Thank you so much. And good luck with this. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next to meet with me in Madeleine's elegant living room, the artist Jacqui Poncelet, who established herself as a major figure in the international ceramic scene during the late 70s and 80s before diversifying her practice to include painting, sculpture and textiles, as well as public commissions such as Wrapper, an enormous colourful pattern piece which wraps around Edgware Road tube station in London. She has a new extensive exhibition at Roche Court, which she talked me through, saying, "I find it reassuring when things are complicated because life is complicated." Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm all right, I think. Ask me in 20 minutes.
Yeah. We are at Roche Court, New Art Centre, in just outside Salisbury, and you have a new exhibition here.
Yes, I do. Yeah. It was interesting because some people have said, you've got a retrospective, but actually it's a survey show, and that's slightly different. And I think if I was setting out to do a retrospective, I think I might do it the year before I died, because there's something about...
It's like a bit like writing your own obituary or something.
Exactly, yeah. Sort of wrapping it up, which I hope this exhibition isn't about wrapping up.
So what does a survey mean to you?
It's a way of, I think there's two ways of looking at exhibitions. There's a public way, and for artists there's always a private way. And so I'm going to talk not about the public way, but about the private way, because my way of working keeps changing, and the materials that I use keep changing. And there's a moment where you feel like you'd love to have an opportunity to look at yourself. So that's what I see it as, a way of looking at myself and seeing how and it's only a snapshot, that we could have put together a very different show, very different materials, different balance. So in a sense, you have curated the self you want to meet, which is also an interesting thing. I'd like to I wonder how that person hangs together.
And you're exhibiting at Roche Court, which is obviously a very special place. How does that affect what kind of show it is, the surroundings and how it's interacting with the space it's in?
Well, it's at Roche Court there are several galleries, and I'm in the newest one, which is called the Design House. And the sort of secret to that, rather like with the artist house, is the word house. So rather than thinking of it as a gallery, you're thinking of it as domestic spaces, and that's very important to me. I mean, there are two, apart from the kind of way that my work is sort of dispersed through different techniques, I have a public and a private way of working. So I've done large public art projects in London, and let's call it my private work it's about and it's for domestic spaces, and it's such an interesting way of, for me, I mean, it is interesting and important that when I'm making work, it's often about how we are within ourselves and within spaces, and how spaces and the things within them can affect us. So, it's ideal for me. And then the way that the Design House has been designed is with these windows that give you little snapshots of the outside without dominating, so because there are some contemporary galleries where the outside is so compelling and delicious, it's very difficult to turn yourself around and look at the art. Whereas here, these little snapshot windows are giving you a wonderful colour feed that I hope adds to the work, actually.
And when you say the difference between work that's public work and work that's for the home, I think you said.
Yes.
Is that to do with size?
It is partly for me, yes. Because I think a very tiny work can have a huge impact within a domestic, I'm going to say environment, that's making it a bit, within a room.
An environment, that sounds quite
that's a bit, exactly. We're talking about the impact something can have in a room. Whereas when I'm doing public art, you're working with the city. The city doesn't not exist, it's very present.
Can you give a bit of for people who haven't seen this show or might not see it at all?
Yes.
Can you give a bit of a virtual tour and describe what the experience is like and what some of the pieces in the show are like?
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to do that. You don't come in through the front door, you come in through the kitchen. And that's interesting.
See an Aga.
A kitchen table, some chairs, some things on the shelf. So you're immediately set into I'm always talking for myself. I'm not telling other people the feeling they're going to have. But for me, you're immediately with the feeling of, it's a home. And they may not, even if the work's very, very beautiful, they may have another side to them, which you can choose to see or not to see. And that's why I call it the other side of the coin. That that emotional charge isn't necessarily a positive one. And I think that it's not beholden to an artist to do things to reinforce what's positive. I think it's actually very helpful sometimes in life to feel that there's an expression of some deep and not necessarily comfortable emotion that you've had, and you can find it in a work of art, and that's a comfort and not something that undermines you. So that, in a sense, and this is something I've learned from doing it, because doing this show has changed a sense of my own work for myself. I feel it's sort of set a tone for a kind of range of emotions that you're at liberty to feel.
What's the before we go there? What's the time frame? How long? What time period are we covering of your work here? Are they all from different
Yes, we're going from... there had to be a cut-off point. I'm ancient. Otherwise, the shows, there aren't enough rooms. So it was partly my decision that we would start from 1985. Before that, I'd been very well known for the ceramics I made, and there is ceramics in the exhibition. But let's say I stopped making pots. So it's from the point when I stopped making pots. And the work starts from there. It's not necessarily chronological within the show, even though it goes from earlier to later towards the end of the show. There's a bit of a kind of jumble, and that's partly because I don't like things to be tidy. I think it's a mistake to tidy things up. You want to... I find it reassuring when things are complicated, because I find life complicated. So the first work you'll see, which you will have passed as you've gone into the other side of the coin, is a piece called Hair Leather Lace. And it is hair. It is, it's plastic lace, it's not cotton lace. And then there appears to be a sort of leather-clad hand holding on to the hair. And it looks so much like the little black dress, which you could either see as your little cocktail dress or it's a waitress's dress. And there's something about hair. And because it flips between being a head of hair with a little scarf on it and a dress, of course all the relationships change. Because if it's a dress, then the hand is round the waist. If it's your hair, then the hand is moving the hair aside. So there are all these things that, you can play with in your own mind. And I like that thing of feeling that you can change scale and think of things in larger and smaller. So then as you go along the corridor, there's just a pair of paintings, a little diptych, of, on the one hand, lots of eyes, and on the other hand, hands and feet sitting side by side. I leave people to make of that what they will. And then you go into the main large space, and there you have 3 sculptures and 2 paintings and a very large carpet. And I suppose I don't know, do you want to tell me which one? Is there one that dominates the room, or do they...
I mean, the carpet obviously does in terms of scale.
Yes.
I think for me it's about different... It's very tactile, so it's about different textures. So you see lots of things that are different textures, and you almost, whereas the ceramics is cold and hard, a lot of it is soft. Looks like it's going to be soft.
Yes.
And also, I was really struck by how different they all are to each other. They could be all by lots of different artists.
Oh no, there was a joke about it's a group show by one person.
But why do you think that is?
It's because I'm changing materials, isn't it? And going between 2 and 3 dimensions. And because that isn't the convention we have for artists, even though there's lots of artists who work in lots of different ways, aren't there? I mean, Bruce Nauman would make a sculpture or a film and we wouldn't think anything of it. I suppose there's a huge change of scale, and especially that thing that you just said about this feeling of... I'd like to think that even the paintings look as if the objects are really tactile in the paintings. And I think what was interesting going around with other people this morning who don't know what the things are made of was what they thought they were made of. They thought that the ceramics was fabric, and they thought the bronze was wood. And
is that intentional?
No, not at all. But those are, without wanting to sound wishy-washy, those are kind of funny little presents, because you think, of course I can't see that because I made it. I mean, I can't deny what I know. So then it's always fascinating when people describe things to you, and it's definitely not your experience. Especially as, of course, I've picked them up, so I have an association with weight as well. And, there's a wonderful carpet shop on your way to, just as you walking up towards Piccadilly. And a friend bought me a book from there, and he said, you always buy carpets with your feet. So when you were saying about things being tactile, I immediately thought, oh yeah, if you had bare feet and were walking on the carpet, that would be a very different experience. So I like to think that a lot of the work is about sensuality, and the sensuality would be both visual and, in some senses, physical. I mean, I think people are slightly disconcerted by the bronze with hair, but I wonder why. I mean, I can see why, but I wonder why. I wonder why they can't accommodate it really quickly. Because you think of that thing, we're always touching our hair, aren't we? And then we might touch an armchair or a table leg or something. What I find really interesting is the way we imagine our lives rather than experiencing them, I suppose would be a way of describing it. That we're all the time, in order to just survive walking down the road, you can't be looking at everything. But then we also do that day to day. We can't afford to experience everything that we're doing. It's funny, really, isn't it? I mean, we'd never get anything done. Ooh, this lovely armchair, so soft.
And have we been through the whole exhibition now?
No, because when you come up the stairs, there's another composite painting. Then there's a larger composite painting as you come round the corner. Then you go into the first room there, and there's a very large drawing and ceramics on the floor. Then you go into the next room with the wallpaper and the clothes. On the window seat there are 2 blankets. And you pass the watercolours, and you go into the last room with the 4 sculptures, and a painting. So I really do hope that people get to the end, because I think it's very difficult. We go to a lot of things anticipating, and that's how we deal with them. And I don't know that you could anticipate what you're going to see. So you might want to go back again and think, oh, I hadn't expected that. I knew that one. Yeah, I knew she did those, but I didn't know she'd done this.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today.
No, it was a pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure hearing from you. Thank you.
Finally, I spoke with Madeleine Bessborough herself. The recording isn't perfect, as we were sitting outside, just underneath these huge, beautiful trees which created lots of noise, but I left the interview in the podcast as I felt that she's so important to British sculpture and has such insightful things to say. I asked her about how the art world has changed since she was working in it in the 50s and where she sees it going from here.
I do feel we're filling a gap at the moment, because being in an open space makes people feel comfortable, and they can... Well, we're particularly lucky with Edmund's exhibition, which fits the space, that our gallery space, so well. The first exhibition we had here was of Anthony Gormley's insider figures, and they were all in a line in this long, narrow space, and they looked wonderful. And so from then onward, we've always had interesting exhibition. And Edmund, of course, this time has completely filled the bill, and he's so organised, and the fact that he'd planned the exhibition and sent us the plan of where these new departure for him is these stone benches, and they're extremely heavy.
You're sitting on one right now.
Yes, and they're extremely heavy and difficult to handle. and he planned them down the gallery, and we got them through the doors. And he's, there are very few artists that actually think ahead and think how their work would best be seen. And he's certainly one. I am proud of Roche because it's a place in the country, an amazingly beautiful piece of geography where you look 20 miles to Southampton over really beautiful rolling countryside with very few buildings. And it's, my husband used to farm, so we have a herd of cattle which look quite decorative in front. And at the same time, we make every effort to show new work by young artists at the same time as having the core of British sculpture of the last 30, 40 years. We have Richard Long, we usually have Anthony, we haven't got at the moment because there's been a run on Gormley's. And then there's, we represent the Hepworth estate, and that is, you must go back and see that. We have work and drawings from the estate, and that's a wonderful lifeblood, and it focuses people and grounds them, and it grounds the young on what the tradition of sculpture is in this country, which is second to none, really. And British sculpture from 1950, from Henry and Moore and Barbara, is quite extraordinary, and so many, there are forgotten figures, and we're now able to sort of resurrect forgotten figures like Hubert Dalwood, Robert Adams, people who've fallen out of people's recognition, really. And apart from that, we always have new things. Gavin Turk, Gary Hume, and we have recently, we converted two the farm cottages into what we call a design house, which is, I'm quite bad at reading plans, and I didn't realise it would be quite so big, but it is a beautiful space to show work indoors, and it has that sort of domestic quality about it that is modern but teaches people how you can incorporate sculpture and paintings into your everyday living.
And Madeleine, as someone who's been at the forefront of the art world since the late 50s, I was interested to know how have you observed the way that people interact with art changing over the years? Are there any observations that you can share?
Well, it's a much wider observation. I mean, it's a much wider group of people because of communications and because of, I hope it goes on, telly and all these things. They made art programs, and I think more people are interested. I think the thing that worries me is that still hang on from the past is people think that being interested in art cuts you off from any form of earning your own living. They see the arts as a completely different channel to go down, and the number of parents who come to me and say, my child is quite academic, and they've been to Roche and they're terribly interested, and they now say they want to do history of art at uni, and what do you think? And I always say, well, that's an amazing thing to want to do, and they say, but she'll never earn her own, or he'll never earn it. I mean, how will he ever earn a living? And I mean, the case that I choose is the girl who came here and used to work here on Saturdays and has always been interested, and her parents, I used to meet them in the village shop, and they used to say to me, do try and persuade her. She's got this silly idea, and the school says she could go to Cambridge, or she could go to Bristol, or she could do anything, and she's got this silly idea she wants to. And this girl now is one of the highest paid people working in Dyson's, because she did textiles. She didn't pay any attention to her parents. She did textiles at Falmouth. She then went to the Royal College of Art, and she went and worked in the motor industry, worked for Hondas, was sent to Japan. She's had a fascinating career entirely by being interested in looking at, Richard Long. And so there is a connection, but you've got to point that out to people. And I think industry is very bad at giving everybody the sense of how they do connect with the visual world. But that's changed a lot, because it is better than it was, and it used to be that nobody went into galleries. They were little sort of shops with velvet curtains. And there was no opportunity. No. There were no opportunities for the young. If you were a young artist and did go down that route, if you went to the Royal College, where did you show after that? Or if you went anywhere, there was no opportunities. And then the Arts Council, there were a few sort of strange Arts Council shows that you could possibly get into it. But now, even if you're young, you're a fantastic, interesting commodity to the galleries in London. That's changed. But I don't know. I think the art world has become so big and such a mega industry that is shooting itself in the foot to a certain extent. And actually COVID has proved that. And the size of things. People can't... We're more interested in small things now, I think.
So you can see it going back to a more localised...
Yes. And a more localised images, really. We're very keen to start having sort of graffiti here, because on the outsides of our modern buildings, we've got a lovely expanse, plain expanse, of beautiful plaster. And I suddenly thought, how good to have a David Jones poem written on the wall outside. Use the walls of the houses, make architecture part of literature. So, it's now frowned on.
It was frowned on?
Well, it's not, I mean, it's beginning not to be frowned on, but it's all my lifetime, anybody who wrote or did anything on me was a vandal.
So that's something that's changed, I suppose.
I hope it'll change.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful, the art. When I started the art world, we used to have private views on Sundays, and we were in a very strange place. We were in Sloane Street, which nobody ever believed could be an art street. And in those days, it was a completely local street. It was a street which had a butcher in it, and it had a place you mended your lamps, and it had the Empire food stores, and it was just tiny and wonderful. And a pet shop round the corner. Now, it was then developed. Developers have got a lot to answer for making everything too big.
I read about Derek Jarman showing in your basement
Yes.
in the 70s.
Well, we had Andrew Logan and Derek Jarman were having a joint show, and they fell out on the first day, and Derek put on a sandwich board and walked up and down the pavement in Sloane Street saying, "Don't go in, don't go." I mean, nowadays that would be a scandal. No, in those days it was a joke.
That made lots of people go in, did it? Yeah. All right. Well, Madeleine, thank you so much for talking to me.
Well, I hope you'll come back.
I will, and next time I'll bring my children.
Yes, do. We're tremendously child-orientated.
You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radoichin. The sound and theme music were by Wargie Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. And of course, please do subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for listening.